She came home smelling like his cologne, with bruises on her thighs she couldn't explain. I didn't ask questions. I just moved out while she was at her next business trip. She returned to an empty house and a note. He can have what's left. But that's getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when I still believed in the woman I married and the life we'd built together in our little corner of Millbrook, Massachusetts. My name is Mick Sullivan, and I run Sullivan Construction, a small outfit that specializes in home renovations and commercial repairs. Nothing fancy, but honest work that pays the bills and keeps me busy enough to avoid thinking too hard about the cracks forming in my marriage. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything changed. I'd been working late on a kitchen remodel for the Hendersons, trying to finish the tile work before their anniversary party that weekend. The job ran longer than expected, and by the time I pulled into our driveway on Maple Street, it was nearly midnight. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. Sloane's BMW sat in the driveway, which surprised me. She'd mentioned working late on some financial analysis for her firm, Morrison and Associates. Usually when she stayed at the office past 10, she'd crash at her friend Rena's place downtown rather than make the 40-minute drive home. I found her standing at the kitchen counter, still in her work clothes, a navy blazer and skirt that probably cost more than I made in a week. She was pouring herself a glass of wine with hands that shook slightly, and when she turned to face me, I caught it immediately. The cologne. Heavy, expensive, nothing like the Old Spice I'd been wearing for 15 years. It hung around her like a cloud, mixed with something else I couldn't quite place, something that made my stomach tighten. "Hey," she said, her voice carefully casual. "How was the Henderson job?" "Fine." I set my toolbox by the door and studied her face. Her lipstick was gone, her hair slightly mussed despite the hairspray she used to keep every strand in place. "Long day at the office?" "You know how it is. Quarter-end reports." She took a sip of wine, avoiding my eyes. "I grabbed dinner with the team afterward. Went longer than expected." I nodded, still watching her. That's when I noticed the marks on her thighs, dark smudges visible below the hem of her skirt. Not bruises exactly, more like pressure marks, the kind you might get from gripping fingers or the edge of a desk. Sloane followed my gaze and quickly tugged her skirt down. "I'm exhausted. Think I'll head up to bed." She brushed past me on her way to the stairs, and the cologne smell intensified. Definitely not from dinner with the team, unless Morrison and Associates had started hiring male models for their accounting department. I stood in that kitchen for a long time after she went upstairs, staring at the wine glass she'd left on the counter. The lipstick stain on the rim was darker than what she'd been wearing when she left that morning. Someone else's shade. This wasn't the first time. Over the past 3 months, there had been other signs. Late nights that became overnight stays. New clothes she claimed were gifts from girlfriends. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. Credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to, on days when she said she was working through lunch. I'd told myself I was being paranoid. 15 years of marriage, and Sloane had never given me reason to doubt her. She was ambitious, driven, sometimes cold, but unfaithful. The thought seemed impossible. Now, standing in our kitchen with the scent of another man's cologne still lingering in the air, the impossible became inevitable. I walked to the window and looked out at our quiet neighborhood. The Hendersons' house was dark now, their kitchen renovation nearly complete. Tomorrow, they'd wake up to new countertops and fresh tile, ready to host their anniversary celebration. 25 years together, they told me proudly. A quarter-century of love, commitment, and shared dreams. What did Sloane and I have? A mortgage, joint checking accounts, and apparently, very different ideas about what for better or worse meant. I climbed the stairs quietly. Sloane was already in bed, facing away from me, her breathing too controlled to be natural sleep. I undressed in the dark and slipped under the covers, maintaining the careful distance that had become our norm over the past year. As I lay there listening to her pretend to sleep, one thought kept circling through my mind. I didn't ask questions, but maybe it was time I started getting answers. The next morning, Sloane was gone before I woke up. No note, no goodbye, just the lingering scent of her expensive perfume and a coffee cup in the sink. Her usual routine when she wanted to avoid conversation. I had 3 jobs lined up that day. A bathroom repair on Elm Street, a deck installation for the Kowalskis, and a consultation for a basement renovation across town. Honest work that usually kept my mind occupied. But as I drove from job to job in my pickup truck, all I could think about was that cologne and those marks on Sloane's thighs. By lunch, I'd made a decision. If my wife was living a double life, I needed to know the details. Not for some dramatic confrontation. I'm not the type to throw dishes or make scenes. But a man has a right to understand what's happening in his own house. I started small. That evening, when Sloane announced she'd be working late again, I offered to pick up dinner from her favorite Thai place. "That's sweet, but I'll probably grab something near the office," she said, already heading for the door. "Don't wait up." Instead of settling in with a beer and the Red Sox game, I drove downtown to Morrison and Associates. The building was mostly dark by 8 o'clock, just a few scattered windows glowing on the upper floors. Sloane's BMW wasn't in the parking garage. I found it 20 minutes later outside Russo's, an upscale Italian restaurant in the financial district. Through the window, I could see her at a corner table with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of guy who probably used hair gel and owned more than one suit. They weren't discussing quarterly reports. She was leaning across the table, laughing at something he said, her hand resting on his forearm. He was feeding her bites of dessert, intimate gestures that made my chest tighten. When he reached across to brush a strand of hair from her face, she didn't pull away. I sat in my truck for 45 minutes, watching my wife play the role of single woman with practiced ease. They left together, his hand on the small of her back as they walked to his silver Tesla parked beside her BMW. The license plate read Elliot B., personalized, of course. Guys like that always needed everyone to know their name. I followed them at a distance to the Harbor View condos, one of those glass and steel towers that had sprouted up during the tech boom. Expensive, the kind of place where the doorman wore a uniform and the elevator required a key card. Sloane's car stayed in the visitor parking lot until nearly midnight. When she finally came home, I was in bed with the lights off, listening to her move through our house like a stranger. The shower ran for 20 minutes, washing away evidence, I realized. When she slipped into bed beside me, she smelled like our lavender body wash instead of his cologne. "How was work?" I asked quietly. "Exhausting. These quarter-end reports are nightmare." Her voice was steady, practiced. "How was your day?" "Fine. Fixed Mrs. Peterson's bathroom sink, started the Kowalski deck." "That's nice." She rolled over, putting her back to me. "Good night, Mick." "Good night, Sloane." But I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, processing what I'd seen. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a single mistake. The way she'd moved through that restaurant, the practiced intimacy, the ease with which she'd lied to my face, this had been going on for months. Over the next 2 weeks, I established the pattern. Tuesday and Thursday nights were late work sessions. Friday afternoon was lunch with the girls. Saturday morning was yoga class, even though she came home without the usual post-workout glow. Each time, I found her car at different locations around the city. Sometimes Russo's, sometimes the Harbor View condos. Once at a hotel bar downtown where she and Elliot, I'd learned his name from a conversation I overheard her having with her friend Rena, sat in a booth like teenagers, hands all over each other. The worst part wasn't the cheating itself, it was how good she was at it. The seamless lies, the manufactured details about her fake activities, the way she could look me in the eye over breakfast and ask about my day while planning her next rendezvous. 15 years of marriage, and I was discovering I'd never really known my wife at all, but she didn't know me either. Sloane saw what she wanted to see. A simple contractor who fixed things with his hands and didn't ask complicated questions. She had no idea that I'd spent 2 years in business school before my father's heart attack forced me to take over Sullivan Construction. She didn't know that running a small business required the same strategic thinking as her financial analysis, just with smaller numbers and higher stakes. Most importantly, she didn't know that I was 3 steps ahead of her. While she was playing house with Elliot, I was making my own plans. Quiet, methodical preparations for a future that didn't include a cheating wife or the life we'd built on lies. I opened a new bank account at a different institution, slowly transferring small amounts from our joint savings. Nothing large enough to trigger alerts or raise questions, just gradual withdrawals that looked like normal expenses. Home improvement supplies, equipment repairs, the kind of business costs that Sloane never paid attention to. I contacted a lawyer, Marcia Leeds, who specialized in divorce cases and had a reputation for protecting her clients' interests. We met at a diner across town, away from Millbrook's gossip network. "How long has this been going on?" Marcia asked after I'd laid out the situation. "Months, maybe longer. I only started paying attention recently." "Any children?" "No, we talked about it early on, but Sloane's career always took priority. Now I'm grateful." Marcia nodded, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Joint assets?" "The house, 2 cars, savings accounts, retirement funds. I've been moving money slowly, but most of our wealth is tied up in property and investments." "Smart man. Document everything. Photos, receipts, dates, locations. Massachusetts is a no-fault state, but evidence of adultery can influence asset division, especially if she's been spending marital funds on her affair." I left that meeting with a clear plan and a retainer agreement. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was back in control of my own life. That night, Sloane announced another business trip. "Chicago this time," she said over dinner. 3 days of meetings with a potential client. Big account. "Sounds important?" I kept my voice neutral, supportive. "Need a ride to the airport?" "That would be great. Flight leaves at 8 tomorrow morning." I smiled and nodded, already planning my next move. While she was in Chicago, or wherever she was really going, I'd be making some changes of my own. Changes that would leave her with exactly what she deserved. Nothing but the consequences of her choices. I drove Sloane to Logan Airport on a crisp Thursday morning in November, playing the role of supportive husband one last time. She was dressed for business in a charcoal suit and heels, her travel bag packed with clothes I'd never seen her wear around the house. "Call me when you land," I said, kissing her cheek at the departure curb. "Of course. Love you." The words rolled off her tongue like a practiced script. "Love you too." But as I watched her disappear into the terminal, I knew those would be the last lies we'd tell each other. I drove straight home and called Frankie Torino, my foreman and the closest thing I had to a best friend. We'd worked together for 8 years, ever since he'd answered my Craigslist ad looking for experienced help. Frankie was built like a linebacker, with hands the size of dinner plates and a loyalty that ran deeper than most marriages. "Need a favor," I said when he answered. "Big one. Name it. Help me move, today. Everything has to be gone before Sunday." There was a pause. Frankie knew about my marriage troubles. Not the details, but enough to understand that this wasn't a normal relocation. "Where are we going?" I found a place on Industrial Avenue, small apartment above Murphy's auto shop. Month-to-month lease, utilities included. Sounds perfect for a guy starting over. I'll be there in an hour. Frankie arrived with his pickup truck and his nephew Danny, a college kid who could lift a refrigerator without breaking a sweat. I'd already started the sorting process, dividing our shared life into 3 categories: mine, hers, and ours. Mine included my tools, work clothes, personal documents, family photos from before our marriage, and a few pieces of furniture I'd inherited from my grandfather. The essentials of a life that existed independent of Sloane. Hers was everything else: the expensive artwork, designer furniture, kitchen gadgets she'd bought and never used, clothes that cost more than most people's rent. The material accumulation of a woman who defined herself through possessions. Ours was the hardest category. Wedding gifts, shared memories, items we'd chosen together during happier times. I left most of it behind, taking only what had genuine sentimental value. Let her explain to her friends why the house suddenly felt so empty. "You sure about this?" Frankie asked as we loaded my grandfather's workbench into his truck. She made her choice. Now I'm making mine. The apartment on Industrial Avenue wasn't much to look at, 600 square feet above an auto shop, with thin walls and windows that faced the loading dock of a paper supply company. But it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned, in a neighborhood where nobody knew my name or cared about my business. We finished the move by late afternoon. As Danny headed home and Frankie grabbed beers from the mini fridge I'd installed in the corner, I walked through the empty space that would be my new home. It felt more honest than the house on Maple Street had in years. What now?" Frankie asked, settling into one of the 2 folding chairs that constituted my living room furniture. "Now I wait for her to come home." "And then?" I pulled out a piece of paper and a pen, considering my words carefully. This note would be the last communication between Sloane and me, the final punctuation mark on 15 years of marriage. After several drafts, I settled on 5 words that captured everything I needed to say. "He can have what's left." I placed the note on the kitchen counter where she'd see it immediately, weighted down with her house keys. Then I walked through our empty home one last time, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. In the bedroom, I left her jewelry box untouched and her clothes hanging in the closet. The bathroom still held her expensive skincare products and perfumes. The living room retained her decorating touches: throw pillows, candles, art books she'd never opened. Everything she'd valued was still there. Everything that mattered to me was gone. I locked the front door behind me and drove to the Iron Anchor, Millbrook's unofficial town hall where news traveled faster than social media and everyone had an opinion about everyone else's business. Barb Hennessy, the owner and bartender, looked up as I walked in. She was a woman in her 50s who'd seen 3 generations of Millbrook residents drink their way through life's ups and downs. "Mick Sullivan, haven't seen you in a while. The usual?" "Make it a double." She poured 2 fingers of whiskey and slid the glass across the bar. "Rough day?" "You could say that." Barb had a gift for reading people, and she could probably see the weight I'd been carrying for weeks. But she didn't push for details. That wasn't her style. "Sometimes a man needs to make changes," she said, wiping down the bar with a practiced motion. Takes courage to admit when something isn't working. I raised my glass in a silent toast and drained it in one swallow. The whiskey burned, but it was a clean burn, honest and straightforward, nothing like the slow poison of living with lies. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sloane. Landed safely. Hotel is nice. Miss you already. I deleted the message without responding and ordered another whiskey. 3 hours later, I was sitting in my new apartment, eating takeout Chinese food and watching the Red Sox highlights on a small television I'd bought at a pawn shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. No pretense, no performance, no careful choreography around another person's secrets. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Sloane's flight was scheduled to return Sunday evening. I'd calculated the timing perfectly. She'd walk into that empty house just as the sun was setting, when the shadows would make the absence feel even more complete. I imagined her calling my name, expecting me to appear from the garage or basement with some explanation for the missing furniture. The confusion would turn to concern, then to understanding as she found the note. She'd call my phone, of course, multiple times. I'd let every call go to voicemail, then delete the messages without listening. Let her experience the same silence I'd endured while she was building a life with another man. By Monday morning, the gossip network would be buzzing. Mrs. Duval, our neighbor, had probably already noticed the moving truck and would be spreading theories about what happened. The story would reach the Iron Anchor by lunch, the post office by dinner, and every beauty salon in town by the end of the week. Sloane would try to control the narrative, paint herself as the victim of an unstable husband who abandoned his responsibilities. But the note would undermine that story. 5 words that suggested I knew more than I was saying. He can have what's left. Not, I can't do this anymore, or we need time apart. Nothing that implied emotional breakdown or temporary separation. Just a calm acknowledgement that she'd made her choice, and now she could live with the consequences. I finished my Chinese food and cracked open a beer, settling back to watch the game. Tomorrow, I'd start the next phase of my plan. Tonight, I was just a man in his own space, answering to nobody but himself. It felt better than I'd expected. Sunday evening came with the kind of November chill that cuts through your jacket and reminds you winter's approaching. I was in my apartment, installing new locks on the door. Old habits from the construction business. When my phone started ringing, Sloane's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called again 5 minutes later. Then again. By the 7th call, I turned the phone off entirely and focused on my work. The locks were good quality, the kind that would keep out anyone who didn't belong. Monday morning brought a different kind of call. Marcia Leeds, my lawyer, sounded amused when I answered. Your wife's attorney contacted me this morning. Seems she's concerned about your whereabouts. I'm sure she is. She's claiming you've abandoned the marital home and is requesting immediate action to freeze joint assets. Wants to paint you as unstable and financially irresponsible. I smiled, sipping coffee from a chipped mug I'd bought at a yard sale. How'd that work out for her? Not well. Hard to claim someone's financially irresponsible when they've been systematically protecting marital assets from a cheating spouse. The documentation you provided was very thorough. Over the past month, I'd photographed every receipt, every credit card statement, every piece of evidence that showed Sloane spending our money on her affair. Expensive dinners, hotel rooms, gifts that never made it home, thousands of dollars of marital funds used to finance her double life. What's next? She'll receive divorce papers by Wednesday. I've included a detailed accounting of her extramarital expenses and a request for reimbursement to the marital estate. Her lawyer will advise her to settle quickly and quietly. And if she doesn't, then we go to court, and her affair becomes public record. Given her position at Morrison & Associates, I doubt she wants that kind of attention. I hung up, feeling satisfied, but not vindictive. This wasn't about destroying Sloane. It was about protecting myself and ensuring she couldn't rewrite history to make me the villain. That afternoon, I was replacing a water heater for the Kowalskis when Mrs. Kowalski brought up the subject everyone in Millbrook was discussing. Heard you and Sloane are having some troubles, she said, offering me a cup of coffee during my break. People hear a lot of things. She was at the grocery store yesterday, telling anyone who'd listen that you disappeared without warning, left her high and dry. I nodded, focusing on my work. The beauty of small-town gossip was that it flowed both ways. Sloane could tell her version of events, but other people had eyes and ears too. Funny thing, though, Mrs. Kowalski continued. My sister works at Morrison & Associates. Says Sloane's been taking a lot of long lunches lately. Always dressed up, always in a hurry. People work hard these days. Sure they do. But work doesn't usually leave lipstick on your collar or have you giggling like a schoolgirl in the parking lot. I looked up from the water heater. Your sister saw that? Saw her with some fancy man in a Tesla, twice, maybe 3 times. Young guy, real smooth looking, the kind who probably uses more hair products than most women. Elliot. Even without seeing him, I knew exactly who she was describing. Like I said, people see a lot of things. Mrs. Kowalski smiled knowingly. They sure do, and they talk about what they see, especially when someone tries to make them look foolish. By Wednesday, the gossip mill was working overtime. I heard fragments of conversation at the hardware store, the diner, the gas station. Sloane's story was falling apart under scrutiny, and people were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about her business trips and late nights at the office. That evening, Frankie and I were at the Iron Anchor, playing pool and minding our own business, when Rena Morrison walked in. She was Sloane's closest friend and biggest enabler, a woman who treated other people's marriages like soap operas. Well, well, she said, approaching our table with the confidence of someone who'd never been punched in the mouth. If it isn't the disappearing husband. Rena. I lined up my shot, sinking the 8-ball in the corner pocket. How's tricks? You've got some nerve, Mick Sullivan. Walking out on your wife without so much as a conversation. She's devastated. I'm sure she is. I racked the balls for another game, not bothering to look at her. Must be hard explaining to people why the house feels so empty. She doesn't need to explain anything. You're the one who ran away. Frankie stepped forward, but I waved him off. This conversation was long overdue. Funny thing about running away, I said, finally meeting Rena's eyes. Usually involves going somewhere new. I'm still right here in Millbrook, working the same jobs, drinking at the same bar. If anyone's been running away, it's not me. What's that supposed to mean? Means your friend's been living a double life for months, and now she's upset that someone noticed. Hard to play the victim when you're the one holding the smoking gun. Rena's face flushed red. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Ask her about Russo's restaurant, or the Harborview condos, or that Tesla that's been parked in our driveway when she thought I was working late. The color drained from Rena's face. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Whatever Sloane had told her, it clearly didn't include those details. She made her choice, I continued, chalking my cue stick. Now she gets to live with it. Simple as that. Rena turned and walked out without another word. Within an hour, I knew, every detail of our conversation would be reported back to Sloane. Let her try to explain away the specifics. Thursday brought the divorce papers, delivered by a process server to Sloane's office at Morrison & Associates. According to Marcia, the entire accounting department witnessed the exchange, making it impossible for Sloane to keep the situation private. Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Sloane's name appeared on the screen for the first time since Sunday night. I considered letting it go to voicemail, then decided it was time to have the conversation we'd been avoiding. Hello, Sloane. We need to talk. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. About what? About this ridiculous divorce filing. About you moving out without discussion. About the lies you're spreading around town. I haven't told any lies. Have you? Silence on the other end of the line. Then, I don't know what you think you know, but I know about Elliot. I know about the restaurants, the hotels, the condo downtown. I know about the credit card charges and the fake business trips and the cologne you came home wearing. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. It's not what you think? It's exactly what I think. The only question is whether you want to handle this quietly or make it everyone's business. Mick, please, can we meet somewhere? Talk this through like adults? We're talking now. I mean in person. There are things you don't understand, circumstances that... The only thing I understand is that you made a choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. Sign the papers, Sloane. Take what's left and move on. I hung up before she could respond and turned off the phone. The conversation had gone exactly as I'd expected. Denial, deflection, and attempts to regain control of a situation that had already slipped away from her. But this was only the beginning. Sloane wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and Elliot probably thought he was untouchable. They'd both learn otherwise soon enough. The game was just getting started. The confrontation I'd been expecting came the following Friday night at the Iron Anchor. I was shooting pool with Frankie, enjoying the kind of quiet evening that had become precious to me, when the door opened and Sloane walked in. She wasn't alone. Elliot followed behind her, all 6 feet of entitled confidence wrapped in a designer jacket that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had the kind of carefully maintained appearance that screamed, I work out with a personal trainer and I've never done manual labor in my life. The bar went quiet as they approached my table. In a town like Millbrook, this kind of drama was better than cable television. Mick, Sloane said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room, We need to talk. I'm busy. I lined up my shot, sinking the 5-ball in the side pocket. Nice jacket, though. Elliot's got good taste in restaurants, too. How was Russo's last Tuesday? Sloane's face went pale, but Elliot stepped forward with the kind of swagger that suggested he'd never been in a real fight. You must be the husband, he said, extending his hand like we were meeting at a networking event. Elliot Brandt. I think there's been some misunderstanding about the situation. I looked at his manicured hand, then back at his face. No misunderstanding. You're the guy who's been entertaining my wife while I was working. She's the woman who's been lying to both of us about what she wants. It's not that simple. Sure it is. I walked around the pool table, getting close enough to smell his expensive cologne, the same scent that had clung to Sloane's clothes for months. You wanted to play house with a married woman. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. I wanted to know the truth. Now we all got what we wanted. Barb appeared at my shoulder, bar towel in hand. Everything okay here, Mick? Just fine. These folks were just leaving. But Elliot wasn't ready to back down. Maybe he thought his gym membership made him tough, or maybe he was used to intimidating people with his money and connections. Either way, he made a mistake. Look, friend, he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. Sloane and I are in love. What you two had was over long before I came along. Be a man about this. The bar held its collective breath. Even Sloane looked nervous, like she was finally realizing that her two worlds were about to collide in spectacular fashion. I smiled and gently removed his hand from my shoulder. You're right about one thing, Elliot. What Sloane and I had is over, but here's what you don't understand. She didn't choose you. She chose herself. You're just the current entertainment. That's not true, Sloane said quickly. Elliot, don't listen to him. He's just bitter. Am I? I turned to face the crowd that had gathered around us. Tell me, folks, how many of you have seen Sloane around town lately? Mrs. Kowalski, didn't your sister mention something about long lunches and parking lot conversations? Mrs. Kowalski, who was sitting at the bar with her husband, nodded slowly. She did mention that. And Barb, how many times has Sloane been in here over the past year? Before tonight, I mean. Barb shrugged. Can't say I've seen her, not much of a regular. I looked back at Elliot, whose confident expression was starting to crack. See, that's the thing about small towns. People notice things, like when someone's car is parked at expensive restaurants on nights when they are supposed to be working late, or when they're spending money on hotel rooms during business trips that don't show up on any company calendar. Sloane's face was bright red now. Stop it, Mick. This isn't necessary. You're right. It's not necessary, but it's happening anyway. I picked up my beer and took a long sip, letting the tension build. You want to know what's really funny, Elliot? She's been playing the same game with you that she played with me. All those nights she told you she was stuck at home with her boring husband. I've got credit card receipts that say otherwise. What are you talking about? Elliot's voice had lost its smooth confidence. Ask her about the Marriott downtown. Room 412, 3 weeks ago. Or the weekend in Boston she told me was a work conference. Funny thing about hotel records, they're very detailed. I was bluffing about the specific details, but the look on Sloane's face told me I'd hit close to the mark. She'd been juggling more than just 2 men, and now everyone in the bar knew it. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? Then show him your credit card statements. Show him your phone records. Better yet, show him the real reason you came home smelling like cologne that wasn't his. The crowd was eating this up like a soap opera marathon. Even Frankie was grinning, clearly enjoying the show. Elliot turned to Sloane with confusion and growing anger. What is he talking about? What other men? There are no other men, she said desperately. Mick's just trying to hurt us. He can't stand that I'm happy. Happy? I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You want to talk about happy? I'm happy, Sloane. For the first time in months, I wake up every morning without wondering what lies I'm going to hear that day. I don't have to smell other men's cologne on my wife's clothes or pretend I don't notice when she deletes text messages. I turned to address the entire bar. You want to know why I moved out? Because my wife came home smelling like his cologne. With bruises on her thighs she couldn't explain. I didn't ask questions. I just made sure she wouldn't have to lie to me anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the jukebox seemed to have stopped playing. Sloane looked around the room at faces that had known her for years, seeing judgment and disappointment where she'd expected sympathy. This wasn't how she'd planned to control the narrative. Come on, she said to Elliot, grabbing his arm. We don't have to listen to this. But Elliot was staring at her with new eyes, processing everything he'd just heard. Is it true? Are there others? Of course not. He's just... Because if you've been lying to me the way you lied to him, I need to know now. The cracks in their relationship were showing, and I hadn't even gotten to the good part yet. You want to know the truth, Elliot? I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken weeks ago. Sloane at a downtown bar with a man who wasn't him. This was taken last Tuesday, same night she told you she was working late and told me she was having dinner with girlfriends. Elliot's face went through several emotions before settling on rage. Not at me, but at the woman who'd been playing him the same way she'd played me. You lying witch, he said, his polished veneer finally cracking. You told me you were done with him. You said you were ready to leave your marriage. I am ready, Sloane said desperately. This doesn't mean anything. It's just what? Just another lie? Just another man you're stringing along while you figure out what you really want? The argument that followed was everything I'd hoped for and more. Two people who'd been living in a fantasy world suddenly confronted with reality, turning on each other like animals in a cage. I finished my beer and put $20 on the bar. Thanks for the entertainment, folks. I'll see you all next week. As I walked toward the door, I could hear Sloane calling my name, but I didn't turn around. Let her clean up her own mess for once. Outside, Frankie caught up with me in the parking lot. That was brutal, man. You sure you want to leave it like that? It's not over yet, I said, climbing into my truck. That was just the opening act. The aftermath of the Iron Anchor confrontation spread through Millbrook faster than a grease fire. By Monday morning, everyone from the postal workers to the church ladies knew the intimate details of Sloane's affair and the spectacular public breakdown of her relationship with Elliot. I heard the gossip everywhere I went. At Murphy's auto shop below my apartment, where the mechanics discussed it over coffee and cigarettes, at the hardware store, where customers whispered about it while examining paint samples, even at job sites, where homeowners brought it up like they were discussing the weather. Heard your wife's been keeping herself busy, said Mr. Henderson as I finished installing his new kitchen faucet. Shame how these things work out. People make choices, I replied, testing the water pressure. Then they live with the consequences. What I didn't tell Mr. Henderson was that the consequences were just getting started. Sloane had tried calling me dozens of times over the weekend, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that I'd deleted without listening to. She'd also shown up at my apartment twice, pounding on the door and demanding we talk like civilized adults. I'd ignored her both times, letting her shout herself hoarse in the parking lot while I watched television with the volume turned up. On Tuesday, she tried a different approach. I was at the Kowalski house finishing their deck renovation when a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Sloane got out of the passenger side, followed by a man in an expensive suit who screamed, "Lawyer," from 50 yards away. "Mr. Sullivan?" The lawyer approached with the kind of confident stride that suggested he was used to intimidating people. "I'm Richard Vaughn, representing Mrs. Sullivan in your divorce proceedings. We need to discuss your recent behavior." I set down my hammer and looked at them both. Sloane was dressed for business, but her usual composure was cracking around the edges. Dark circles under her eyes, nervous energy in the way she kept checking her phone. What behavior would that be? The harassment, the public humiliation, the deliberate sabotage of my client's reputation and relationships. What happened at that bar was completely unacceptable. I told the truth. If that damaged her reputation, maybe she should have thought about that before she started lying. Vaughn pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. We're prepared to file restraining orders, harassment charges, and civil suits for defamation, unless you're willing to discuss a reasonable settlement. I looked at the folder, then at Sloane, who was trying to read my expression. What kind of settlement? 50-50 split of all assets. No alimony, no claims against future earnings, clean break, no public statements about the marriage or its dissolution. And in return? You stop talking about my client's private life. No more public scenes, no more spreading rumors or gossip. I pretended to consider the offer, watching Sloane's face carefully. She thought she was regaining control, getting back to the negotiating table where she felt comfortable. Counteroffer, I said finally. She takes the house, the furniture, her car, and her debts. I keep my business, my tools, and my self-respect. And she explains to everyone in town why she thought she could lie to me for months without consequences. Vaughn shook his head. That's completely unreasonable. My client is entitled to half of everything accumulated during the marriage. Your client forfeited her entitlements when she started spending marital funds on hotel rooms and expensive dinners with her boyfriend. Check with my lawyer. We've documented every penny. Sloane finally spoke up. Mick, please, can we talk privately? Just for 5 minutes? I looked at my watch. You've got 3 minutes. Your lawyer can wait in the car. Vaughn started to protest, but Sloane waved him off. When we were alone on the half-finished deck, she tried the approach that had worked for 15 years, manipulation disguised as vulnerability. "This isn't you," she said softly. "You're not vindictive or cruel. We can work this out without destroying each other." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to pretend anymore." What we had was real, Mick. The problems, the distance, that happened gradually. It wasn't anyone's fault. You're right. The distance wasn't anyone's fault. But the lying was. The cheating was. Coming home smelling like another man and expecting me to pretend I didn't notice. That was a choice you made. Her composure finally cracked completely. "What do you want from me? You want me to grovel, to beg forgiveness? I made mistakes, but so did you. You stopped trying, stopped paying attention to what I needed. What you needed was honesty. What you wanted was to have everything both ways. There's a difference. So this is it? 15 years of marriage, and you're just going to throw it all away over a few mistakes?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. The woman I'd married was still there, buried under layers of ambition and selfishness and entitlement. But she was buried too deep to matter anymore. "I'm not throwing anything away, Sloane. You already did that. I'm just cleaning up the mess." She stared at me for a long moment, searching for some crack in my resolve. When she didn't find one, her expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted hatred. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "When you're sitting alone in that pathetic apartment, eating takeout and watching television by yourself, you'll remember what you lost. Maybe, but I'll also remember what I found." Which is what? Self-respect, peace of mind, the ability to sleep at night without wondering what lies I'll hear in the morning. She turned and walked back to the car without another word. As they drove away, I saw her on her phone, probably calling Elliot or one of her other boyfriends for comfort. That evening, I was at the Iron Anchor with Frankie when Barb approached our table with a concerned expression. "Mick, you might want to know, Sloane was in here earlier with that lawyer. They were asking questions about Friday night, trying to get people to say you started the fight or made threats." "And nobody's buying it. Mrs. Kowalski told them exactly what she thought about married women who cheat on their husbands. It got pretty heated." Frankie grinned. "I'd have paid to see that." "It gets better," Barb continued. "Apparently Elliot's been calling around town, trying to find out about Sloane's other boyfriends. Word is he's not taking the breakup well." "Other boyfriends?" "That's what he thinks. Based on what you said Friday night, he's convinced she's been playing him the whole time." I hadn't expected that particular consequence, but it felt like poetic justice. Sloane had built her double life on lies and manipulation. Now those same lies were turning her victims against each other. Over the next week, the situation escalated in ways I couldn't have predicted. Elliot, convinced that Sloane had been cheating on him too, started his own investigation. He hired a private investigator, demanded access to her phone records, even showed up at Morrison and Associates asking questions about her work schedule. Sloane, caught between her ex-lover's paranoia and her husband's divorce proceedings, made increasingly desperate attempts to regain control. She tried turning our mutual friends against me, spreading stories about my emotional instability and violent threats. But most people had known me longer than they'd known her version of events. She tried going to the police, claiming I was stalking her. Officer Leon, who'd known me since high school, took the report, but didn't take it seriously. "Mick Sullivan's not the stalking type," he told her, according to what I heard later. "Maybe you should focus on your own behavior instead of trying to blame everyone else." She even tried sabotaging my business, calling potential clients to warn them about my personal problems. But in a small town, that kind of behavior backfired quickly. People didn't like being told who they could hire, especially by someone whose own reputation was in ruins. The final confrontation came 3 weeks later, at the annual Millbrook Harvest Festival. I was there with Frankie and some of the guys from work, enjoying the kind of community event that reminded me why I'd chosen to stay in this town despite everything. Sloane appeared near the beer tent, looking haggard and desperate. She'd lost weight, and her usually perfect appearance showed signs of stress and sleepless nights. "We need to end this," she said, approaching me with shaking hands. "It's gone too far." "I agree. Sign the divorce papers." "I'm not talking about the divorce. I'm talking about what you've done to my life, my job, my friends, my relationship. You've destroyed everything." I looked around at the festival crowd, many of whom were watching our conversation with obvious interest. "I haven't destroyed anything, Sloane. I just stopped participating in your lies. You turned everyone against me. You made me look like some kind of monster. You did that yourself. I just refused to help you cover it up." She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. "I loved you, Mick. Whatever else happened, I did love you. Maybe you did, but you loved yourself more, and that's why we're here. So what happens now? You get your revenge, and I lose everything. I considered the question seriously. Looking at her, broken, friendless, facing the consequences of years of selfish choices, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just sadness for what we'd both lost. You don't lose everything, I said finally. You lose the things that weren't really yours to begin with. The marriage you stopped caring about, the friends who only knew the fake version of you, the boyfriend who was just as dishonest as you were. And what do I have left? The truth? For the first time in years, you don't have to keep track of lies or maintain false relationships. You can figure out who you really are when you're not performing for someone else. She stared at me through her tears, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married 20 years ago. Young, ambitious, full of dreams she thought she had to achieve alone. I'm sorry, she whispered. For all of it. For the lying, the cheating, the way it ended. You deserved better. Yeah, I did. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'll sign the papers tomorrow. Good. She turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back. For what it's worth, you were right. About everything. I thought I could have it all, and I ended up with nothing. I watched her disappear into the crowd, carrying herself with what was left of her dignity. It was the last time we spoke as husband and wife. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Sloane moved to Boston, taking a job with a smaller firm that didn't know about her reputation in Millbrook. Elliot left town entirely, apparently convinced that small-town life wasn't for him. I kept my apartment above Murphy's auto shop, my construction business, and the respect of people who mattered. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was honest. Sometimes, late at night when the shop below was quiet and the street was empty, I thought about what Sloane had said at the festival, about love and loss and the price of getting everything you think you want. She'd been wrong about one thing, though. I didn't lose everything. I lost a marriage that had become a lie, a house full of expensive things that never felt like home, and a woman who'd forgotten how to tell the truth. What I found was worth more than what I'd lost. I found myself.